Good morning, friends, and welcome to my first crafting vlog. Though making a sewing thread rack from an old unused cheeseboard probably sounds a bit odd, this lovely handmade rack has helped me greatly in organizing my ever-growing collection of sewing threads. I hope that this short vlog will help guide and inspire you to go forth and pursue your wildest crafting ideas. Although I chose to use a wooden cheese board and bamboo skewers from my thread rack, it would have turned out just as beautifully if it was made from another type of repurposed wooden plank, perhaps a retired cutting board. Just as a word of advice, be sure that your spools fit on the wooden dowels before you start. For those interested in making their own thread rack, this project will require a few fancy tools, namely a drill, some sort of multi-purpose hand saw, and a fine grit sandpaper. I also brought along an old cutting board to protect my desk from drilling and a hand vacuum. The first step in making a thread rack involves determining how the spools will be positioned on the board. This will be dependent on the size of the board itself and also the diameters of the spools. This specific cheese board had a built-in slicing mechanism, which I removed before filming, and I decided to make use of the separator that the slicing mechanism left behind as a way to separate spools from bobbins. For those interested, a bobbin is essentially a small spool of thread that is often tucked into the bottom of a sewing machine. Next, I measured the diameters of the spools and bobbins in order to determine how far apart they would need to be. And with a little bit of math and the help of a calculator, it was determined that this board could hold 12 thread spools and 7 bobbins. I then went ahead and drew guidelines along the board to mark where each peg would be placed. Once I had finished mapping out all of the guidelines, I actually went back with a marker and I dotted each specific spot. This made it a little bit easier to see later on. Now to prepare for drilling. First, I went ahead and picked a drill bit that was slightly smaller than my skewer. A little trick that I used to avoid drilling too deep was to line the drill bit up against the side of the board, to position it to the preferred depth, and then to use a white pencil to mark off on the bit how deep the drill should go. And just as I was about to finish drilling, the bit got stuck in the board. But not to worry, my friends, as I was able to remove it with the help of some pliers and no damage was done to the board. Now with the drilling all finished, I did a little vacuuming and then sanded each of the holes that I had just drilled to soften them out and remove any splinters. Now with the board totally finished, I do think it's time for a little tea break. I hope you don't mind. Today, I'll be enjoying some pomegranate tea and a slice of homemade pumpkin cake. Tea break is over. Let's get back to it. After confirming that the skewers fit perfectly in the holes, I used one of my tallest thread spools to decide how tall the pegs on the thread rack should be. I then used my favorite handsaw to roughly cut the skewers into 12 tall pegs and 7 short pegs. And don't worry if you don't cut all the way through and if there's a little fraying, because I'm going to be sanding it right after. One by one, each peg was then sanded and placed in a spot on the thread rack. Here you can see that the fraying is really cleaned up nicely with just a bit of sanding. And now for the best part of all, tapping them into place with a rubber mallet. This last step was optional, but I did choose to rub a little bit of oil into the board to give it a slightly darker tone and a bit of shine. And believe it or not, the thread rack is totally done. Now I get to add all of my favorite threads to the rack, and actually from this angle you can probably see more easily the separation between the spools and the bobbins that I had mentioned earlier. So in total, this thread rack took just about 2 hours to make, which included the brief intermission for pumpkin cake and tea. It was really a fun project, and to see the sun setting after a long day of rain made it even more delightful. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for stopping by. Please feel free to check out my website or Instagram linked below, and I'll see you in my next video, friends.